I'm Could Pink Maine's local coordinator. I live in Solon, Maine. It's great to be back in Charlottesville. I love Charlottesville. And I'm very thankful to the people that organize this conference. It's a ton of work to organize something like this. And David Swanson and many other people. I'm grateful to my host, John Kessler. And I'm grateful to the people that made time in their schedule to be here today. So thank you very much for that. I'm also part of the Bring Our War Dollars Home campaign in Maine, and that has now become a national campaign. And the lead-in of the questions that were coming from the audience about what the heck are we going to do about the problems, and how can we build a movement, and what are our talking points, and how do we stay on message and get the message out there was so awesome, because that's exactly what I was supposed to talk about. So I was going to give this speech anyway, even if they hadn't given me that great lead-in, but they did, so. Donald Rumsfeld said in an interview last week, the Department of Defense is not what's causing the debt and the deficit, it's the entitlement programs. He told this to Human Events in an exclusive interview. If we make that mistake, and I'm quoting from Rumsfeld again, the war criminal Donald Rumsfeld, if we make that mistake, we're doomed to suffer another attack of some kind, and our intelligence will be less strong and less effective. Okay? So that kind of fear-mongering is what we're up against. And that kind of twisting of events and lying to people, using the mass media to do so, is what we're up against. And I think we all in this room know that. Very early in Congresswoman Shelley Pingree's first term in office, I met with Congresswoman Pingree, and I said to her, please stop spending money on the wars and stop funding the military. Please bring the money back home to Maine, which is a very poor state. I'm a school teacher in the poorest county in Maine. Almost everyone in my school has family members that are unemployed and have been for a long, long time. What Congresswoman Pingree said to me was, it's not that easy. They say to me in Congress, she did not define who they were, but I think we could all make some pretty educated guesses. They say to me, what do you want to do? Throw 3,000 people out of work at Bath Iron Works your first term in office? Now, Bath Iron Works is owned by General Dynamics, is the largest employer in Maine in the military-industrial complex, and they make those Aegis nuclear-equipped destroyers that they're ruining Jeju Island that Ann Wright told us about last night in order to dock more of them right close to the Chinese coast. This is a global problem. It's an environmental problem. It's an economic problem. It's a humanitarian problem. But that's what a brand new, pretty progressive congressperson is told the minute they get there. Do you want to be responsible for destroying all these jobs? So I'm going to ask the audience, what do you think that I said to Shelley Pingree at that point? What would have been my good talking point at that point? Anybody have a thought? We've already heard about it today, fairly extensively. There was a really good question about it. I said, what about the study by economists showing that military spending is the worst way to create jobs? And she said, oh yeah, I know all about that report. I used to go around giving talks about it. Okay? So we know what the situation is and what we're up against. Now, we've been sitting for a long time this morning, and I'm going to ask the audience, if they will, to participate in a little bit of an activity here to kind of show what you believe. If you don't want to participate, that's fine. But it would be, usually when teachers do this, you move across the room, but in a theater like this, I think that may be difficult. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to ask you, if you think that Congress has the power to cut the military budget, would you please stand up from your seat right now? So you believe Congress has the power to cut the military budget. And if you're unable to stand, you could raise your hand to show that you're voting with that. Okay. So most of the people in this room think that. Okay, please take a seat. How many people think that Congress has the will to cut military spending? So please stand up, or if you don't want to stand up, raise your hand. How many people think Congress has the will? I think there are 2 people standing up because someone's trying to get out of their row. Okay. Now, okay, Robert's standing, and so that's pretty significant because he's a pretty smart guy who spent a lot of time thinking about this stuff and studying about it. So and also an optimist, I think. Would I be right? I don't know Robert real well. I just met him last night. But
according to my training, being an optimist is part of the activist job description.
Indeed it is. Thank you for reminding us of that. All right. Now I'd like to ask you, how many of you believe that the American people, or the U.S. people, let's be more accurate, America is a continent, not a country, that people in the U.S. have the power to cut military spending? If you believe people in the U.S. have the power to cut military spending, please stand or raise your hand. Okay, so again, we're seeing a majority standing. Okay, please take a seat. I'm going to ask you one last question, and it's the parallel of the other one. How many of you believe that the people in the U.S. have the will to exercise that power to cut military spending? I see Bruce Gagnon has his hand up, another optimist. People are thinking about that. Do people in the U.S. have the will to do so? It's possible, but it's a stretch. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for participating.
Yes, we personally have the will. But the American people is a big, big group.
It's a very good point, personally. Okay, you want me to ask personally, how many people think that you personally have the will to cut military spending? Speaking for yourself as an individual. Super. Thank you for restating the question that way. Almost everybody. Wonderful. So what we're up against is a perception that is at odds with reality. As we can see, most of us disagree that we don't have the power or the will, yet we hear a lot of disempowering messages about that. But as Robert made a good case for, the tide is turning. We have an opportunity in Congress specifically, but also I think we have an opportunity with the economic situation being as bad as it is and getting worse rapidly. Again, just last week we heard in the news that 1 in 6 people in the U.S. live below the poverty line, and the poverty line is pretty damn low. It's like $22,000 for a family of 4. You know, that's a pretty low poverty line already. It was 1 in 5 for children. So people that look at those kind of official figures and make some adjustments felt that actually it's probably roughly double that if you're really talking about, you know, can you provide health care for the family? Can you provide adequate nutrition? Can you educate people? And that's a pretty shocking statistic. I wasn't amazed because I live in a pretty low-income part of the country, but we in the Bring Our War Dollars Home campaign have been feeling all along, this is our golden opportunity. You can't tell people they're affluent who can't afford health insurance and who lose their house to the bank because they're trying to be good citizens and pay their hospital bills. You can't tell them that we have a good economy. You can tell them, but they won't believe it because they're experiencing something different. And when the cognitive dissonance between what they're being told and what they're experiencing reaches a high enough level, suddenly they see, oh, I'm being lied to, and what I'm seeing on the mass media maybe isn't in my best interest, and it isn't even true. So we have been trying to capitalize on that particular opportunity here for a while by specifically connecting budget cuts at the local level, you know, when they're laying off police, or they're not fixing the roads, or the bridges are literally falling down because they haven't been fixed. We try to jump into that discussion saying, do you have any idea how much money is being spent on the military? Do you have any idea what kind of effect that has on the ability to fund these things? We have had a couple wins lately. Last night at the podium, Claire reminded us about the U.S. Conference of Mayors. The U.S. Conference of Mayors don't have the power to make Congress do anything, but they started meeting in 1932 in Detroit to say, how are we going to help our people in the big cities during this Great Depression? What are we going to do? Let's pressure the federal government to see our pain and help us out. And so they have met annually to advise the federal government on policies that relate to cities. And they debated and passed for the first time since the Vietnam War a specifically anti-war resolution that, when we heard the words and Claire read it to us, said defund the military and use that money to address human needs. So that is a win. It's a somewhat symbolic win. It got a lot of mainstream press coverage, and it's a platform to continue to say the will of the people is not being carried out by Congress. And you know, it's important to have those opportunities to do that. I'd just like to speak briefly about a small win that we had recently in our neck of the woods. There was a mobile Veterans Administration clinic in Bingham, Maine. Bingham, Maine is halfway between the equator and the North Pole. It is the beginning of sort of the Great Maine Forest, and people are so economically deprived there of jobs and the opportunity to make a living that literally OxyContin is a medium of exchange. If someone mows your lawn, you could pay them in Oxy, not because they necessarily use it, but they could liquidate that asset easily in the local community. That's coming from a social worker who's a friend of mine who's a very trustworthy source. Okay, so there's a clinic there, a community health clinic, but next to it there was a trailer that was a mobile VA clinic. And it gave routine service to veterans that live even farther north than that, all the way up into very remote areas with very little health care available. So the VA announced that they were going to close that clinic because it cost too much. They were just right up front about it. It cost too much to keep it open. And people said, well, how much is it? And they said, between $100,000 and $200,000 a year to keep that clinic open. Does that mean the veterans aren't going to get health care? No. It means they're going to have to drive down to Augusta, the state capital, and Togus, the big VA hospital there, to get their care. Well, this is like a 4 or 5 hour round trip in the car to go get blood drawn or something like that. So naturally, there was a public outcry. There was a public meeting. My husband, Mark Roman, went down with flyers connecting the cost of military spending to closing of clinics. And about 150 people showed up. Most of them were elderly veterans saying, what the heck, this isn't what we were promised. You know, 4 minutes of the war in Afghanistan would keep that clinic open for a year. That's the kind of scale we're talking about. And the people in this room have a pretty high background knowledge about it. And still, when you hear a metric like that, you're kind of like, that's almost unbelievable. Is she a math teacher? Did she divide, right? And I'm not a math teacher, but I've checked my figures with people that are good at this sort of thing. And the scale is just amazing. Just amazing between military spending and funding human needs. So the good news is we did win that round, and the VA announced about a week later that they would keep the clinic open. Now, as was also alluded to by the previous speakers, we all know that the people's priorities are different than the priorities that we're seeing by our supposedly representative government. The people's budget that was put out by the Congressional Progressive Caucus was right in line with the kind of moving the money priorities we're talking about. The mayors represent, you know, millions of people in the United States, and many of the mayors, I went to the conference in Baltimore in June, some of the mayors that spoke in the floor debate said, this is the only resolution I heard from my constituents about. This is the only one I got phone calls about. And they said most of the people who called them were veterans. So, good on you for using those resources that way. In Maine, we did a penny poll recently, and that is one of those exercises where you give people 10 pennies and you say, pretend that's the federal budget for a year, the discretionary budget, the income taxes that come in, the revenue that comes in that could be expended on things. What would you like to spend it on? And there were 10 categories. And it was done in front of like supermarkets, post offices. We didn't try to do it at meetings like this. We tried to do it with the general public, and the results were sort of hidden from view. It was done, over 1,500 people responded. It was in all 16 counties through about a 2-month period. And of course, you know, you wouldn't be surprised to know that the #1 priority was education. The second priority was healthcare, and the third was a Veterans Administration, Veterans Services. Now that includes a lot of education money and a lot of healthcare money as well in that category. Maine is a poor state, and people have, as Ann Wright described to us last night, chosen the military very often as the only job in town, a path out of the small town where you grew up, a chance to travel and see the world. And Maine also has the highest per capita rate of deaths in Afghanistan, which is a pretty sad distinction. So as each new federal budget proposal comes out of the White House and Congress, we seem to move farther and farther from those priorities. But thank goodness for our friends who crunch the numbers for us and give us the tools to talk to our neighbors. I mean, I'm not going to stop calling Congress before I have my Cheerios, and I'm not going to stop finding Shelley Pingree or Mike Michaud or Olympia Snow or Susan Collins where I can find them and speak to them. But it's really my neighbors. It's really the person standing in line with me at the post office, or the custodian that works at my school, or the veteran whose benefits are being cut. That is the audience that I believe I need to communicate with. And the Bring Our War Dollars Home campaign has used the tools of the National Priorities Project, that's nationalpriorities.org is their website, extensively as a way to help us understand a big, complicated economic document, and to be able to communicate with people about these kind of trade-offs like 4 minutes of war in Afghanistan equaling a year of health clinic. So here we have the discretionary fiscal year budget for 2012, so this must be the proposed budget. And you can see that this, I think you can read that that big slice of the pie is military spending. So it's been edging up. My husband makes these great pie charts out of pizza pie things that we take on marches and rallies, and every year it goes up a little bit more. It's 51%, and then it's 54%, and then it's 57%. I recommend pie charts highly as a way to communicate with even pretty young people about, here's one whole, what share of it is going here, there, and the other place. The other tool that's been...
Is there any way you can increase the size of the farm?
Probably not.
Okay. You got it.
It's hard to read the 59% number.
Is that what it is, 59?
I don't think I probably can on this particular computer.
Does health include Medicare?
Raise your hand.
NationalPrioritieSproject.org.
Thank you.
Does health include Medicare?
I don't think health includes Medicare.
Discretionary.
Medicare is funded by payroll taxes, not income taxes, so I think this is a...
Entitlement programs. Entitlement programs are not in the discretionary spending.
Right.
Sorry to shell out like that.
No, that's great. Thank you for your clarification.
No questions now, y'all. Come on. At least we got something to do. We got a day or two.
That's right.
Come on.
We're going to do an activity where you'll have a chance to really have some input here, too. I was also really thrilled to hear a discussion about the report, the U.S. Employment Effects of Military and Domestic Spending Priorities, which is a really exciting report, probably a little more exciting than the title suggests, by Robert Collin and Heidi Garrett-Peltier out of UMass Amherst. This is the report that I, referenced to Shelley Pingree. She said, yep, know all about it. I'm just going to kind of briefly run through I did this as a percent change, because saying that $1 billion investment will create 2,000 more jobs is a good metric, but only if you're investing $1 billion. So I kind of ran the numbers, and if you just took that money and gave it back to people as income tax relief, it would create 26% more jobs than investing the same billion in the military. And if you did construction of components that are used to weatherize homes, make buildings more energy efficient, it would result in 50% more jobs. This is number of jobs, not number of dollars. If you put it into healthcare, you'd get 51% more jobs. If you put it into education workers, so not funding people's education, but hiring people to work in the education sector, you would get 107% more jobs. And then at the top of the heap, as we mentioned a minute ago, mass transit. I believe that's manufacturing for mass transit. Bruce is nodding his head. So this is a factory that builds light rail, for instance. You would get 131% more jobs. So the argument, do you want me to throw 3,000 people out of work my first term in office, is best answered by no. I want you to put 131% more jobs into Maine by not building Aegis destroyers and building light rail instead for the public transportation. Okay, enough talking for me. Let's get to work. I have developed a little activity for us today under the guidance of David Swanson, And this is a conversion activity. We decided to base it on the town of Charlottesville because that's where we are, and a lot of us really love Charlottesville. And my associates, Mark Roman and Pat Taub of Code Pink Maine, are going to come around and give you each 2 papers. One of the papers is a full sheet, and it is a sort of a paper and pencil version of a game that I am heavily promoting. I am trying to find funding to develop an online game, like a Farmville type of game where people can fool around on Facebook instead of doing their homework. But it would be a conversion game because, as many people have mentioned, the average person in the United States doesn't believe that conversion could even happen. And if they do believe it could happen, they think it's going to be worse, not better. They think it means job loss. They're listening to liars like Donald Rumsfeld, and they're believing that crap. So I think that aiming at a very young audience that tends to spend a lot of time online gaming is a good communication strategy. The game proposal is available online. You'll see a link to it on one of the papers that you get. There's also paper copies of it out at the registration desk. And if I'm not going to go into a big extensive pitch for my game, but I would be remiss to not spend my few minutes here at the podium to say, if you're interested in this idea too, please talk to me. I would love to work with you on it. Okay, so you're going to get a kind of paper pencil version of this game. And in this game, on the front page is War Dollars Home Charlottesville Conversion. And over to the left is a column where you could, if you wanted to, do a kind of needs assessment of what is it that people do need in Charlottesville. When you flip the paper over, you're going to see a column on the other side of the paper that is the amount of money that you would have to redirect. Now, there's a small half sheet coming around also that tells you 2 different budget amounts that come from the National Priorities Project data. One of them is the total for Iraq and Afghanistan war spending, and the other one is the big enchilada of the Pentagon budget for a year. This is a choice item. You can either do the war spending or you can do the Pentagon budget. If you want to be like some politicians, you could add them both together and spend all that money, even though that wouldn't really be very economically sound in terms of this game, but it's a choice. The other thing that I want to point out to you is that I designed this game for you to work together, because when we all work together and join up, then we can get this job done. There isn't a single one of us in this room that on our own can do this. So if you buddied up with somebody else, and you use the front side of your paper and they use the back side of theirs, these 2 papers side by side will make a game board, so to speak, where you have a kind of a concept map of a town like your town or like Charlottesville, and the type of typical budget categories that a town spends money on. Okay? So what I'm going to ask you to do is choose a number, put it up here at the top of the running total column here in the right-hand corner up here. You're going to write that in, and that number comes from your half sheet of paper. It's on the other side of the half sheet. And then you're going to start funding things.